Hi, my name is Jennifer Ramirez Razo, and I'm going to talk about Mali conflict during 2012. And on the first place, they are presented the general context that I will try to explain during this video. And on the first place, I will start with the introduction. First, with a general explanation about the Republic of Mali. It is located at the heart of the West Africa Sahel region and is divided into 8 regions, as well as it comes with one district. And it must be mentioned that Mali gained independence from France in 1960. And since that, it has tried to implement a democratic system, but it has come with several coups d'etats. For example, in 1968, 1991, 2012, 2020, and 2001, as well as different Tuareg rebellions, which has been an obstacle for implementing this democratic system. It must be mentioned that during this presentation, I will focus more on the coup d'etat of 2012. Now, a general explanation of the conflict is that it started in January 17, 2012, when it started an armed conflict between government forces and organized armed groups, such as National Movement for the Liberation of Azawad, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, Ansar Dine, and the Movement for Oneness and Jihad in the West Africa, and the Arab militias. But which were the main causes for fields? The first is the absence of state institutions and ineffective social services. Here we can talk about the no real presence of the state, which create poverty, lack of access to services and justice, as well as unemployment. All these factors create exclusion of people, creating conditions to create parallel models of governments to substitute the state, as well as also some Algeria and Libya terrorist groups to refugee in the northern Mali. Then is the poor governance and justice mechanisms. Here we can talk about the existence of impunity and corruption in the country of Mali. The third field is the climate change, population growth, and unemployment. Here we can talk about the increase in temperature and how has impact in the reduction of the quality of the soil, as well as in the availability of water. And additionally, we can talk about the fast growing of population and how it is related with the climate change, as limited availability of sources is taking place, but also is taking place an increasing demand of them. And all this context has been created a vulnerability on population, which has been created also some conflicts between communities that compete for land in a violent way. And also we can talk about how the unemployment is affecting the young people, which are the most vulnerable to enter to some terrorist groups. And the fourth field, we can talk about the radical influences, understanding for them all that situations that create extreme ideologies and actions in the political, social, or religious fields. And an example of how this has been taking place in Mali is through the spreading of extreme Islam, as well as with the proliferation of ethnic armed groups and militias or factions, as well as with the emergence of terrorist groups. Then we can talk about the classification of the conflict. Regarding with the content that we saw in class, this conflict is an interstate war because it has been taking place between and among 2 or more groups within the international recognized territory of the state. And also we can talk that this is a civil war because all the coup d'etat has been a problem that is between the state government and also between non-state actors. But also we can talk about the intercommunal conflict because in a part of the conflict, some armed groups were trying to get the control of the north of Mali. So they were disputing between them and with no influence of the state. And finally, we can talk that the general characteristic of this problem is the asymmetrical because it counts with inequality in arms, as well as with all the different disparities between all the belligerents that take place or are involved in this conflict. Which actually leads us to the next slide, that are the stages of Mali conflict, which can be summarized in 2. The first one talks about how the MLA attacked the Malian forces military base in Menaka during January 2012, as well as include the coup d'etat on March 2022 for a military junta. And then we can talk about the second phase, which is from April 2012, which is about how Malian armed forces left the north of Mali, causing that non-state armed groups control the north of Mali, and also that after this, some clash between all the different armed groups for the dispute of the exclusive control over the north of the country. There are some actors that include some more stages, but in this case, I think that is relevant to talk just about. Now, regarding the actors, interests, and dynamics, we can talk on the first place about the Malian government, which is the main responsible guarantee that the interests of the population are protected, which is all fundamented in the Article 53 of the Malian Constitution. Then the Malian Security Forces, integrated for military forces and the police, which has the due to protect all the external and internal threats that are in the country. Nevertheless, it must be mentioned that their capacities has been shaped for the influence of political divisions on those forces, as well as for low salaries that have been leading that some members engage in illicit trafficking, as well as the existence of poor equipment and the lack of professionalism. Then are the insurgent groups, which in this case we can talk about two main groups, that is the platform of movements and the coordination as a what movements, and all they have the capacity to mobilize the communities and also to initiate violence in the northern and central Mali because they were militarized and involved in illicit trafficking. Then we can talk about the terrorist groups. In this case, the most influential ones are Mujao, Ansardine, and Al Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb. Nevertheless, it must be included that during 2017, they create a stronger alliance under the name of Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam Muslimin, which nowadays is considered one of the most important terrorist groups in the country. Then we can talk about the community militias that were created because of the state access and for governance. In this case, they are considered to be an additional actor that is looking for the security of the population because they are trying to protect the population from the attacks on their identities. Some examples of them are the Brigades of Vigilance, Dana Masagu, Kanda Koi, and also Gandaiso. And they have influence because they have the capacity to make even worse the conflicts, as well as they have the capacity of controlling the trafficking routes and products. Actually, they are considered a serious threat to all of the return of national security forces in the country. Then are the regional and international actors, such as African Union and ECOWAS, which were trying to implement some diplomacy and mediation when the coup d'etat took place during 2012. Then are the United Nations that were trying to support through the implementation of MINUSMA through the resolution of the Security Council 2100 in 2013. Then is France, that it has been leading two military interventions in the country. The first one was Operation Serval, and the current one is the Operation Barkhane. And finally, we can find civil society, that it has been trying to make some research to understand in a better way the conflict dynamics, as well as to make some efforts to achieve social dialogue. And then it's time to summarize all the dynamics that these actors have in this diagram that is known as actors mapping that I found in a book, which its side is under the image. And for example, we can find how the relation of conflict exists between the government of Mali and some insurgent groups, as well as some terrorist groups. Additionally, we can find how there are some actors that have some alliance in order to achieve their interests. For example, MINUSMA has alliance with the government of Mali, security forces, as well as we can see how also are interconnected or interrelated some actors such as the civil society, which is the main impacted with all the actions implemented for all the actors that are part of this conflict. Then it's time to talk about the solutions and dispute mechanisms that have been implemented in order to reduce all the conflict. In the first place, we can find how the former president of Burkina Faso, Blaise Compaoré, offered to be a mediator in the ECOWAS to improve the situation in Mali. Then we can talk about the resolutions that UN Security Council implemented, for example, Resolution 2056, 2071, as well as Resolution 2085. Actually, the last one that I mentioned is the one that authorized the implementation of African-led international support mission in Mali. And then is the G5 Sahel, that this is a regional intergovernmental organization that was looking for achieving the development in all the member states that integrate this institution, as well as the security in the territory of all the member countries. In this case, Mali is part of this institution. Then is the European Union. We can summarize its participation through two mechanisms. The first one was with the implementation of a program to increase the conditions to get security in the country and to prevent some problems regarding migration. The second one is a program that was trying to establish the conflict, as well as to create more trust between state and Malian population with the implementation of measures to guarantee access to basic services and economic opportunities. Then is MINUSMA, which is UN Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, which was created for the United Nations peacekeeping missions during 2013, with the resolution 2100 of the Security Council, which in general terms was trying to carry out a number of security-related tasks to solve the problem. Actually, this was the substitution of the African Lead International Support Mission in Mali, which was mentioned in the resolution 2085. Sorry. Another solutions that were trying to be implemented were the political dialogue. Actually, there were implemented mechanisms to get political dialogue with the different actors involved in the conflict. Furthermore, there have been taking place good offices and dialogue missions. Then we can talk about the influence of Algeria, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mauritania. All these countries had a relevant role in influence of the rebel groups that operate in the north of Mali, and for that reason was of great importance they take paper in negotiations. Actually, they concrete the Algiers peace agreement during 2015, which is one of the most important and relevant during this conflict. And finally, as a solutions, there are the France operations. There are two main operations. The first one is Operation Serval, and the second one is Barkhane, which is still ongoing. And now I'm going to talk about the functioning of the solutions aforementioned. On the first place, it is important to talk about the Sahel crisis. The Sahel crisis is characterized for having challenges related with fragile states, poverty, refugees, and migrants, as well as transnational organized crime and jihadist insurgencies. And all these problems are affecting all the region, including Mali. Actually, it is known that all the coup d'etat and the events that happened in 2012 in the country of Mali were the main causes of all the crises in the region. In this case, nowadays, it's important to highlight that nowadays is still one of the more prominent problems on the international agenda, because some international actors has been trying to make some assistance as well as intervene in order to improve the situation, but it has not been a positive response to solve the problem. And if we take all these contexts in the local level, we can find that in Mali still have been taking place some coup d'etat, for example, in 2020 and into 2021 after the coup d'etat that took place in 2012. So for that reason, I want to give some personal recommendations that I create through analyzing this conflict, as well as with the help of some of the learning that I get for the classes. In this case, I think that I identified that there is no clear application of a dispute mechanism settlement. Even if it's mentioned the use of good offices, there is not too much information available about it. I just read that it has been implemented through the mission of MINUSMA. Nevertheless, I think that it must be asked if the use of this kind of missions is really useful, because there are some studies that consider that UN peacekeeping operations even sometimes are getting worse the situations in the country. So it must be relevant to know and understand if it is having a real impact and positive impact. And actually, I think that it is important to implement a dispute settlement mechanism in order to solve the situation between the state and all the non-state actors, such as extremist groups and armed groups and all the militias. And also to implement a mechanism of solution between all the extremist groups that they are not involved in the government. But for that reason, I think that it's important to talk about the dispute mechanism settlements. Nevertheless, we are to use to talk about these mechanisms just when we are talking about the interstate problems, which mean when it's a conflict between a state and a state. And finally, I consider that it is not necessary to solve this situation. It must be relevant to talk about the creation and implementation of actions that can increase the power of the state, or in this case, make it stronger, as well as increase the rule of law in order to prevent the existence of more coup d'etat in the future, because they are not just affecting the state, they are also affecting all the society. And that's all for me. Thank you so much for paying attention.